The faucet was dripping for the third day, and the nasty sound was starting to get on everyone's nerves. I lay on my back under the kitchen sink, wrench in hand, and listened to Crystal and the neighbor talking. She was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot and talking louder than usual, as if she were speaking specifically for my ears. No, Linda, we're not complaining. It's just that the house is big, and the expenses are rising, especially in the winter when the heat's on all the time. And then there's the extra mouths to feed. The gasket was just as worn out as I thought it would be. Good thing I still have some spare parts from the old days. There's a whole drawer of stuff in the garage. Bushings, washers, gaskets. Brad wanted to throw it all out when he moved, but I stood up to him. It'll come in handy, I told him. Everything comes in handy. In the 47 years I've been a plumber, I've amassed a decent collection of stuff. You never know when you're going to need a part, and they charge you triple the price at the store. Of course, Linda, I don't mind helping out the family, but there's got to be some justice, right? You can't just live off other people's money. I carefully removed the old gasket and wiped the faucet seat with a rag. The metal shone like new. My hands are still strong, not like some of the younger ones. Brad spent an hour last week with a stuck bolt on his lawnmower, but 5 minutes was enough for me. Your muscles remember the motion, your fingers feel the metal. It's not forgotten like riding a bicycle. In the last years of my work, my young colleagues were often surprised at how quickly I could identify a breakdown by touch, without even looking under the sink. Sharon Kanodua, well, yes, I have a pension, but you know what pensions are now. Ridiculous money. But he eats like a young man, especially meat, and he takes long showers, waste water. Crystal was silent, listening to her friend's answer. I installed the new gasket and began to put the faucet back together. It's a simple job, but it requires care. If you over-tighten it, the threads will break. If you under-tighten it, it will drip again. The main thing in plumbing is a sense of proportion. Know when to stop. Over the years of practice, it becomes ingrained in the blood, becomes an instinct. The front door slammed, and I heard Brad's footsteps down the hall. He always walked heavy, dragging his feet like he was carrying a bag of cement on his back. When he was a kid, he was different. Light, quick. He ran around the yard like a man on fire, playing baseball with the neighborhood boys. Dorothy always worried that he was taking too many risks, climbing trees or riding a bicycle with no hands. But years of sedentary work and constant stress had changed his gait. Now he shuffled like an old man, even though he was only 42. Hi, honey, he said, kissing Crystal on the cheek. How are you doing? Oh, hi, Dad. Russell's fixing the faucet, Crystal replied without much warmth. He's been under the sink for half a day. Half a day is a gross exaggeration. I started about 40 minutes ago, but Crystal liked to be dramatic when it came to my actions. If I read the paper, I've been sitting around all day. If I watched TV, I was occupying the living room. Every move I made was critically analyzed. Even when I helped with chores, she found a way to cast it in a negative light. That's fine. It's good that you still have your hands, Brad said, but there was a strain in his voice. It must have been a long day at work. He'd been coming home a lot lately, haggard and droopy-eyed. I tightened the last nut and climbed out from under the sink. I turned on the water. It was running smoothly, without drips. It's nice to get the job done right the first time. When I was young, I was proud of the fact that I rarely had to redo things. Clients appreciated it, recommended it to friends. Go to Russell Whitman, they'd say. He does a good job. Done, I said, wiping my hands on an old t-shirt. The t-shirt was from when I used to work. It had a faded Master of Golden Hands inscription on the chest. Dorothy gave it to me for my birthday. Said that's what all the neighbors said about me. The shirt was now work clothes for household chores. Brad nodded and opened the refrigerator. He took out a can of beer, opened it and took a big gulp. He had a habit of drinking right after work before he even changed clothes. It annoyed Crystal. She thought it was rude, but she kept quiet. In their marriage, she chose her battles carefully, didn't waste energy on trivialities, saving her energy for the important battles. How was work? She asked, still stirring the contents of the pot. It smelled like tomato sauce and basil. Crystal was a good cook, she had to admit. Better than the late Dorothy, although I never said that out loud. Dorothy was a wonderful wife and mother, but her culinary talents were modest. It's okay. We're about to start a new project, a high-rise on 6th Street. There's enough work to last until spring, maybe even next summer. Crystal nodded, but I noticed the muscles in her neck tense. She was always nervous when it came to money, and always looking for a way to save money or find extra income. She was always running numbers in her head, how much we spent, how much we could spend, what we could cut back on. Listen, darling, I've been thinking, she began, putting the pot on another burner. Maybe we should rethink some of our expenses. Brad raised his eyebrows. His face took on a wary expression. What kind of expenses? Well, utilities for one. I mean, they depend on how many people are in the house. Water, electricity, gas. I pretended to look for something in my toolbox. The conversation was taking a familiar turn. Crystal had started this song 4 times in the last few months. Each time a little different, but the gist was the same. Crystal, we talked about this. We talked about it, but we didn't decide. Look at the electric and water bills. They've gone up 30% since your father moved in. Brad looked at me, then back at his wife. The awkwardness of the situation was obvious. He clearly didn't want to discuss it in my presence. But Crystal was determined. He helps out around the house. He fixed the faucet today, painted the fence last week. That's good, but it doesn't make the bills any smaller. It takes more groceries and more laundry, and it takes up space in the house. I closed the toolbox and headed out of the kitchen. I didn't want to listen to this conversation again. I realized it was better to let them discuss the matter without my presence. Sometimes a tactful retreat is better than an open confrontation. Dad, wait, Brad said. Let's talk about this. This affects all of us. I stopped in the doorway, but I didn't turn around. Something in my stomach clenched, an unpleasant premonition of what was about to happen. I realize this may seem uncomfortable, but Crystal's right. Costs have indeed gone up, significantly. I pay for my own living expenses, I said, still not turning to face them. I know, and we appreciate it, but it's not enough to cover the full cost. Crystal nodded, supporting her husband. There was triumph written all over her face. Brad was finally talking about it straight. She had clearly been preparing him for this conversation for a long time, patiently sowing seeds of doubt. How much do you think is fair? I asked, turning to them. Crystal and Brad looked at each other. Obviously, they had already discussed that figure behind my back, probably more than once. Sananarum. Well, to be honest, your entire pension would be a fair payment, Crystal said, looking me straight in the eye. I mean, we provide you with a roof over your head, food, all the comforts, heating, air conditioning in the summer, cable TV, and laundry, Brad added uncertainly, and cleaning. I looked at them carefully. Brad avoided my gaze, studying the label on a can of beer. Crystal stood straight, chin upturned, arms folded across her chest, the posture of a warrior ready for battle. She was waiting for my reaction, preparing for my objections. Okay, I said calmly. I'll think about it. The answer clearly surprised them. They expected arguments, outrage, attempts to bargain, but I just nodded and headed for the door. You did? Crystal couldn't help herself. You'll think about it? Yeah, I'll think about it. And I went to my room, leaving them in the kitchen to digest my unexpected submission. Outside my room window was an old apple tree that I'd trimmed back in the spring. Now in early October, the last fruits were hanging on it, small but sweet. I sat on the bed and looked at the tree. This apple tree had been planted by Brad's father, my father-in-law Walter. He was a good man, a hard worker. Too bad he died early. Heart attack at 58. He didn't have time to see his grandchildren. Muffled voices came from the kitchen. Brad and Crystal continued their discussion, but in a quieter voice. I could only make out a few words. Fair, family. We can't go on like this. It was a familiar song, one I'd heard more than once. Only now it sounded more confident, more determined. I opened the nightstand and took out a notebook in which I wrote down my expenses. It was an old habit from the time when I was working. I always knew what I was spending my money on, kept track of every last dime. Dorothy was a little annoyed, but I thought it was right to control my finances. The pension was really small, $1,200, but I gave them $800 every month. I left myself 400 for personal needs. Medicines, clothes, small expenses, sometimes gifts to grandchildren. Isn't $800 enough for a little room and a seat at the table? In Muskogee, you could rent a decent studio apartment in a decent neighborhood for that kind of money, but Crystal didn't see it that way. In her mind, I was a freeloader who should be grateful for a roof over my head. She's a calculating woman. When Brad had first brought her home to meet us, I'd noticed the way she'd looked around the house. The furniture, the appliances, the size of the lot. It was like she was estimating the value of the property. My wife Dorothy whispered to me, "She knows her value." She was right, as always. Not that Crystal was a bad daughter-in-law. She kept the house clean, cooked well, took care of the kids, took care of her appearance. But there was something cold, calculating about her. Every gesture, every word seemed to pass through an internal calculator. She knew how to be charming when she needed to be, and tough when she needed results. The voices in the kitchen fell silent. Apparently, the conversation had ended or turned to whispers. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. The kids were back from school. 13-year-old Kyle and 15-year-old Emma. Good kids, smart, well-mannered, but they saw me as part of the setting rather than a grandfather. Crystal didn't really encourage a close relationship between us. "Grandpa's getting tired. No need to bother him," she'd say when they tried to talk to me. The door to my room was ajar and Brad peeked in. His face was guilty, like when he was a kid and broke something and was afraid to admit it. "Dad, can I come in?" I nodded and he sat down in the only chair, an old wooden chair I'd brought from the old house. Almost all the furniture in this room was mine. The bed, the nightstand, the closet, the desk. Crystal didn't want to buy new furniture for a temporary tenant. "Sorry about the kitchen conversation. Crystal is worried about money. We have a mortgage, car loan, kids schooling soon for college." "I understand. You know we love you. It's just a tough situation. Prices are up, taxes are up, insurance is up." I looked at my son carefully. In his 42 years, he looked tired and aged. His hair was beginning to thin at the top of his head, and there were deep wrinkles under his eyes. Being a manager was a nerve-wracking job. Constant deadlines, demanding clients, cranky contractors, competition with other companies. "Brad, be honest. Was this your idea or Crystal's?" He lowered his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "We both think it's fairer this way." Lie. I knew my son well enough to know that the initiative came from his wife. Brad was a gentleman, avoiding conflict. As a child, he had always yielded to more assertive peers, but now he was yielding to his wife. Crystal was a strong personality, able to persuade and push when needed. "All right, I'll think about it," I repeated. "Thanks, Dad. I know it's not easy, but we're hoping for understanding." After he left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the apple tree. The wind had torn off a few leaves, and they swirled slowly, falling to the ground. Winter is coming, and the tree will remain bare until spring. But its roots are strong, deep. It will survive any frost and bloom again when the time is right. Just as I will survive this conversation and find my own way to cope with the situation. The whole family was gathered for dinner. Emma and Kyle sat at the table, staring at their phones, occasionally lifting their heads to grab another batch of lasagna. Crystal arranged the food on the plates with the utmost care, as if she were preparing for a photo shoot for a cooking magazine. Brad was silent as he methodically cut his portion into uniform squares. The atmosphere was tense after our conversation in the kitchen. I could feel Crystal's eyes on me, studying and evaluating. She was clearly waiting for me to announce my decision, but I was in no hurry. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, enjoying the silence that would soon be broken. "Emma, put the phone away," Crystal said to her daughter. At the table, we talked to each other. The 15-year-old rolled her eyes but obediently tucked the device into her jeans pocket. She had her mother's blonde hair and Brad's gray eyes. A pretty girl, but with a temper. In the last year, she'd become more withdrawn, irritable. Transition, hormones, first romantic flings, the usual. "Kyle, you too," the mother added, turning to her youngest son. The 13-year-old boy was the exact opposite of his sister. Quiet, obedient, and prone to obesity. Spent most of his time playing computer games or reading comic books. He studied well, but had few friends. too shy for his age. How was school going? Brad asked, trying to liven up the conversation. Fine, Emma answered one-wordedly. I have a math test tomorrow, Kyle said. Algebra. I need help with quadratic equations. Um, Ask Grandpa, Crystal said, nodding in my direction. He has plenty of time. There was a subtle sneer in her voice. The hint of my idleness was obvious. I looked at Kyle and smiled. Sure, I'll help. Come to my room after dinner. The boy nodded gratefully. Math was hard for him, though he was doing well in other subjects. He just spent too much time playing games instead of studying. Crystal's phone rang. She looked at the screen and smiled. It was Sharon. Can I answer it? She's having trouble with her husband. Brad nodded and Crystal took the call right at the desk. A bad tone, but she didn't pay attention to such trivialities when it came to gossip. Hello, darling. Yeah, we're just having dinner. No, it's fine. What's up with you? Sharon was her best friend and a major accomplice in sharing neighborhood news. A divorced woman in her 40s, working in a bank, and constantly changing suitors. Crystal loved her stories of romantic mishaps and neighborhood family scandals. Oh, come on, did he come in drunk again? Crystal feigned sympathy, but there was a glint of interest in her eyes. What did the kids say? The kids at the table continued to eat, accustomed to their mother's phone calls. Brad frowned, clearly unhappy that the family dinner was turning into a communication session. But he hesitated to say anything. You know, we're having problems too, Crystal continued, lowering her voice, but not so low that we couldn't hear. Money, expenses are going up, but the income is the same. I continued eating lasagna, pretending not to listen, but every word was imprinted on my mind. Yeah, relatives are a real pain in the ass, especially when they think they're owed everything. Crystal gave me an eloquent look. No, not the daughter, the father-in-law. Emma lifted her head and looked at her mother in surprise. Kyle continued to eat intently, but I could see his shoulders tense. Kids could sense tension, even if they didn't understand all the details. He's been living with us for over a year now. He gets a penny pension, but he eats like a horse, takes up a lot of space. He's got his stuff all over the room. Brad put down his fork and looked at his wife warningly, but she was absorbed in the conversation and paid no attention to his signals. Of course, we're not going to kick him out into the street. We're not animals, but we want justice too. Why do we have to keep him on our own dime? Crystal, Brad said quietly. She waved her hand indicating that the conversation was important and should not be interrupted. Yes, Sharon, that's right. You do the laundry, cook the meals, and pay the utility bills. And no thanks, he thinks we owe him. I got up from the table and began to clear my plate. My movements were calm, unhurried, but everything was boiling inside. Not with resentment, with cold fury. Crystal was overstepping her bounds, discussing family matters with strangers. Where are you going? She asked, covering the phone with her hand. To do the dishes, I said, since I'm such a freeloader. Crystal blushed, realizing I'd heard the whole conversation, but she wasn't going to back down. Sharon, I'll call you back later, she said into the phone. Things are escalating here. She put the phone down and turned to me. I wasn't saying anything bad, just sharing my problems with a friend. Sure, I agreed, rinsing my plate under the faucet. It's okay to discuss family finances with strangers. Sharon isn't a stranger. We've been friends for 10 years, which doesn't make her a member of our family. Brad coughed nervously. Dad, maybe we shouldn't make a scene at dinner. I turned to my son. Am I the one making a scene? Or your wife washing my bones in front of her friend? I didn't wash anyone's bones. Crystal was outraged. Shishuri, I was telling the truth. We do incur extra expenses because of you living here. And I'm paying for it. Not enough. The word came out sharply, like a slap in the face. Crystal was surprised at her own bluntness, but there was no turning back. $800 a month isn't enough for room and board? I asked. Soku, for room, board, utilities, laundry, cleaning, and everything else, yes. It's not enough, she replied, lifting her chin. Any nursing home would charge 3 times as much for that kind of service. Then maybe I should look for a nursing home. Dad, Brad exclaimed. Nobody's talking about a nursing home. We're a family. A family that counts every piece of bread Dad ate, I replied. This isn't about bread, Crystal interjected. It's about fairness. You get a pension. Why should we subsidize you? Because I'm your father and grandfather. Or do we have to pay for that separately too? Emma and Kyle sat in silence, looking back and forth at me and my parents. They were uncomfortable watching the family fight, but they didn't dare leave. Kids, go to your room, Brad said. We'll figure it out. But I haven't finished, Kyle said quietly. You can finish it later. Go do your homework. The teenagers hurried out of the kitchen, leaving the three of us to deal with the conflict. Russell, Crystal said, trying to speak more calmly, we don't want to hurt you. Let's just be honest with each other. You live in our house. You have all the comforts of home. You eat our food. My food, I interrupted, bought with my own money. Some of it's mine, but it's not enough to cover all your expenses. Then let's do the math. I sat back down at the table. How much does it cost to rent a room in this neighborhood? It's not just renting a room. How much? Crystal looked over at Brad. $400 to $500, she answered reluctantly. Okay, how much do I spend on food a month? How should I know? I do. I keep records. $250. That's $650. I pay $800. Where does the other $150 go? Utilities, Crystal answered quickly. Laundry, cleaning, wear and tear on furniture and appliances. $150 a month for laundry and cleaning? That's not cheap. It's not just laundry and cleaning. Then what? Crystal was beginning to lose her patience. She wasn't used to being argued with, and demanding specific numbers and explanations. Look, it's not about numbers, she exclaimed. It's about the fact that you're living off us and we don't have to support you. Crystal, Brad said sharply, but the words were already spoken. They hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I see, I said quietly. It's all clear now. I stood up and headed out of the kitchen. No one tried to stop me this time. Brad sat staring at his plate. Crystal stood at the stove with her arms crossed over her chest and a look of righteous anger on her face. In the hallway, I heard the beginning of their conversation. Why did you say that? Why isn't it true? We really don't have to support him. He's a grown man. Let him take care of himself. He's my father. So what? That doesn't mean he can live off us for the rest of his life. I went up to my room and closed the door. It was already dark outside the window. I turned on the desk lamp and sat down at my desk. I took out a notebook of expenses and scrutinized the figures again. $1,200 of pension. $800 I give to them. $400 I keep. About $100 a month for medicine. Clothes and other necessities. Another $100. That leaves me with $200, which I save in my stash. Over the course of a year, that's $2,400, plus what was in the bank account, the inheritance from the sale of the house after Dorothy's death. $23,000. Crystal and Brad didn't know about the money. They thought it had all gone to his wife's funeral and medical bills. There was a quiet knock on the door. Grandpa, came Kyle's voice. Can I come in? Sure, come on in. The boy appeared in the doorway with a math book in his hands. He looked upset. Did you hear everything? They asked. He nodded. Parents fight over money? It's not just about money, I answered. Hey, sit down. Let's go over your equations. We spent the next hour solving problems. Kyle was a bright student, but he just lacked confidence. Explaining the principles of algebra to him distracted me from my unpleasant thoughts. Math was comforting. It had clear rules and unambiguous answers. Thank you, Grandpa, the boy said, picking up his books. I understand now. You're welcome. He reached the door but stopped. Grandpa, aren't you going to leave us? Why are you thinking about it? Mom said on the phone that old people sometimes move into special homes. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Kyle nodded and walked out, but I could see the worry in his eyes. The kids sensed that some serious changes were happening in the family. Downstairs, the voices died down. Apparently, Brad and Crystal had finished discussing my fate. Tomorrow morning, they were probably expecting to hear my decision on the full transfer of my pension. They thought they had me cornered, and now I would beg them to let me stay. But they didn't know me well. In my 73 years of life, I've learned not to show weakness to those who are willing to take advantage of it, and learned to plan my actions without giving in to emotion. I opened the nightstand and pulled out an old address book with phone numbers. Many of the contacts in there were out of date. People had died, moved, changed numbers, but some were still relevant. Flipping through the pages, I found names of people who could help me. Tomorrow I would start making calls. In the morning, there was a tense silence in the house. Crystal was making breakfast, banging pans and plates loudly, clearly showing her displeasure. Brad was sitting at the table with a newspaper, but he wasn't reading, just holding it in front of his face, hiding from conversation. The kids ate breakfast in silence, hurrying to get to school away from the family atmosphere. I went down to the kitchen last, as usual. Over the years, I had developed the habit of staying out of the way in the morning, when everyone was going about their business. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. "Good morning," I said. "Sakanama." "Morning," Brad mumbled, not looking up from his paper. Crystal nodded, but didn't say a word. She was frying bacon, and the oil splattered on the stove with an angry hiss. Every movement betrayed her irritation. She flipped the strips of meat sharply, as if she were angry with them. "Dad, have you thought about what we discussed yesterday?" Brad asked, still staring at the paper. "I did. What did you conclude?" I took a sip of coffee, slowly, savoring the bitter taste. Crystal froze at the stove, waiting tensely for an answer. Emma and Kyle were quiet too, though they pretended to be busy on their smartphones. "I'm ready to discuss new living arrangements," I said finally. Crystal turned to me with a look of triumph on her face. Brad put the paper down and looked relieved. "It's the right decision, Dad. We're a family. We'll find a compromise." "Of course we will," I agreed. "Tell me more about what you meant." Crystal turned off the stove and sat down at the table across from me. Now she was ready for a serious conversation. She must have been rehearsing this scene all night. "Well, first of all, your pension should go entirely toward your living expenses," she began. "That's fair enough. $1,200 a month. Is that all?" I asked. "Not all of it," Brad interjected. Crystal didn't think it was enough. I raised my eyebrows. "Not enough?" "Well, yeah," Crystal confirmed. "Look at the prices at the private boarding houses. They charge $2,000 or $3,000 a month for full care, and we're willing to settle for your pension, even though we're making a loss." "I see. What do you suggest to cover the difference?" Crystal and Brad looked at each other. It was obvious that they had discussed this point beforehand, too. "Sure, so. You could help out around the house," Crystal said. "More than you do now, like taking over the house, cleaning and gardening." "All the cleaning?" "Well, the basic stuff. Vacuuming, mopping the floors, cleaning the bathrooms. I've got a job, kids. I can't keep up with everything." I nodded as if considering the offer. "And the garden?" "Yes, the garden too. Mow the lawn, take care of the flower beds, clean up the leaves. You know how to do that." "I do," I agreed. "And when winter?" "Shoveling snow, salt the walkways, ice the cars." Brad looked uncomfortable. He realized that my wife was turning me into a free servant, but he didn't dare to object. I'd been used to following her decisions in family matters for too long. "Kids, it's time for school," Crystal said, noticing that Emma and Kyle were listening with their mouths hanging open. "But we still have time," Emma began. "Let's get ready." The teens reluctantly got up from the table and headed for the exit. At the door, Kyle turned around and looked at me with concern. I winked at him, showing him that everything was fine. The boy smiled uncertainly and walked out. "So," Crystal continued when it was just the three of us, "you give up your entire pension and take care of the housework. In return, you get room, board, and all the comforts of home. It's a fair exchange." "Very fair," I agreed. "What if I get sick or get injured? Who will do the work?" "We'll hire someone, temporarily." "At whose expense?" Crystal was confused for a second. "Well, we'll see what the situation is." "I see. What about personal expenses? Medications, clothes, birthday presents for the grandkids?" "That's your problem. You can get a part-time job." Brad choked on his coffee. "Crystal, he's 73 years old. Where's he going to work part-time?" "There's all kinds of things. You could take private jobs, plumbing work, or he could get a job at a store as a consultant. Home Depot is a good place for retirees." I pictured a 73-year-old man standing in a building supply store, counseling customers 8 hours a day to earn money for socks and toothpaste. Crystal seriously thought that was normal. I have one more question," I said. "What if I don't like this state of affairs?" "What do you mean?" Crystal asked warily. "If I want to move out, Do I have that option? The pause dragged on. Crystal and Brad looked at each other again, but now there was concern in their gazes. Of course you do, Brad finally said. You're not a prisoner. But where are you going to go? $1,200 won't get you very far. That's my problem, as Crystal rightly pointed out. Dad, don't be like that. It's not like we're enemies. We're just trying to find a fair solution for everybody. For everybody? I questioned. Or for yourself? Crystal couldn't hold back any longer. Look, Russell, let's be honest. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You've been living in our house for over a year. We give you shelter, food, care. Your pension is pennies. Ridiculous money that doesn't even pay the utilities. Pennies? I questioned you. Exactly. $1,200 is nothing these days. We spend more on gasoline for cars. And you act like you're doing us a favor by living here. Brad tried to intervene. Crystal, maybe you shouldn't. No, let him hear the truth, she interrupted her husband. Sorum, your father thinks $800 a month is enough, but it's not. We pay for it out of our own pockets, and not only with money, but with time and effort. Go on, I said calmly. You're not paying enough, Crystal blurted out. And that's a fact. If you want to stay here, you'll either have to pay more or make up the difference. Cleaning the house, tending the garden, helping with the chores, like a common servant. The words hung in the air. Brad turned pale, realizing his wife had gone too far. Crystal was a little afraid of her own bluntness, but it was too late to back down. How are the servants? I repeated slowly. Well, not exactly like a servant, like a family member who contributes to the general welfare. No, you're right. As a servant. I'm up from the table. Thank you for your candor, Crystal. Now I know exactly what you think of me. Dad, wait, Brad said worriedly. She didn't mean what she said. She said exactly what she thinks she said, and that's a good thing. Honesty is the foundation of a healthy relationship. I started to leave the kitchen, but I stopped in the doorway and turned around. By the way, you're right about the pension. $1,200 is really pennies. It's not a lot of money at all. You see? That's what Crystal started. Nalkin, so I'm willing to give it to you in full, and I'll make up the difference by cleaning and gardening. Crystal glowed. Really? You're okay with that? Absolutely, it's only fair. I'll be your domestic servant, and you'll provide me with shelter and food. It's a fair deal. Something in my tone made Brad wary. He knew me well enough to know I wasn't that submissive. Dad, are you sure? Maybe we should talk about the details. Why? Crystal made it very clear. I don't pay enough, so I gotta make it up. Makes sense. Well, yeah, Crystal agreed tentatively. The important thing is that you don't take offense. We didn't mean to humiliate you. Of course we didn't. We just wanted to be fair. I left the kitchen and went up to my room. There were muffled voices behind me. I don't like the way he took it. Brad, don't make this up. He agreed, and that's what counts. He went along too easily. That's not like him. Maybe he just realized he had no choice. When I closed the door behind me, I sat down in the chair by the window and looked at the apple tree in the garden for a long time. The leaves had turned yellow, and some of them had already fallen. Soon they would have to be cleaned up. Grab them in piles and take them to the compost bin behind the garage, just like a domestic servant should. I opened my nightstand and pulled out my phone book. I found the number and dialed it on the old push-button phone. Hello, Frank. This is Russell Whitman. Yeah, it's okay. Listen, I got a question for you. You know how you said if I needed help with my housing, you could help me out? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Frank Collins was an old buddy of mine. We worked on the same projects about 20 years ago. A good plumber and a reliable man. After he retired, he got into real estate, buying old houses, fixing them up and renting them out. Yes, Frank, I need a small apartment, preferably inexpensive. No, it's not urgent. In a week or two, maybe. I'm just looking at some options. We talked for about 10 minutes. Frank told me about several vacant apartments in his buildings. The prices were reasonable, between $400 and $600 a month. Thanks, Frank. I'll think about it and call you back. Yeah, I'm fine. I just want more autonomy. After the call, I went over my records again, $23,000 in the bank account plus $2,400 in cash. That's enough for a down payment and a new place to live. But there was no hurry. First, she had to fulfill her role as a model domestic servant. Let Crystal and Brad realize what it meant to lose $800 of monthly income and a free handyman at the same time. Let them get a taste of that justice they had so insistently demanded. The door slammed downstairs. Brad had left for work. Crystal was alone and was now probably calling her friends, telling them about her victory, about how she'd managed to put her old father-in-law in his place and make him work for shelter and food. I wonder how long it will be before she realizes that the victory was Pyrrhic. The next morning I woke up at 7:30 as usual, but instead of my usual coffee and newspaper, I went to the basement to get the vacuum cleaner. Crystal was still asleep. She never got up before 8. Perfect time to start my new duties. I vacuumed slowly, thoroughly, working every corner of the living room. The noise woke the housemates early, which was actually the goal. Brad came downstairs at 7 a.m., disheveled and disgruntled. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "Cleaning the house," I answered without stopping work. "Just like we agreed." Crystal said it was part of my new duties. "But this early, when's a better time? In the evening, you are tired after work, you want to rest. In the afternoon, Crystal's busy with her chores. That leaves the morning." Brad wanted to object, but I'd already moved toward the stairs, dragging the cord of the vacuum cleaner behind me. I went up to the second floor and started cleaning the hallway, methodically working my way around every square meter of carpet. Half an hour later, Crystal showed up in her robe and slippers. Her face was sleepy, her hair disheveled. "Russell, what's going on? Why'd you start so early?" "I wanted to get everything done before you guys woke up," I explained innocently. "So I wouldn't get in the way. It's my job now." "Yes, but not at 7:30 in the morning. What time should I clean? Give me a convenient time." Crystal was confused. She had demanded that I take over cleaning the house, but she hadn't thought of the practical details. When exactly it should happen, how long it should take, how to organize the process. Well, we could start later. 9 o'clock, for example. At 9, you have breakfast and get ready for work. I'd be in the way. After I leave, then. Okay. What about the vacuum cleaner? It's pretty heavy. It's hard for me to carry it up and down the stairs. Sora, I don't know. You'll manage somehow. I nodded and continued working. Crystal stood for a moment longer, watching me carefully clean the corners, then went to her room. I could hear her talking to Brad, but I couldn't make out the words. By 8 a.m., the first floor was cleaned. I moved on to scrubbing the bathroom floors. I got down on my knees and began scrubbing the tiles with an old toothbrush, reaching into the hardest to reach places. He worked slowly with visible effort, occasionally sighing heavily. Crystal, on her way down to breakfast, peeked into the bathroom. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning the seams between the tiles. They're really dirty. Probably hasn't been cleaned properly in a while. You could just wipe them down. But you said to do it properly, and good cleaning takes time and effort." She watched in silence as I struggled to rise from my knees, my hand clinging to the edge of the tub. Old age infirmity was masterfully portrayed, the result of years of practice working with cranky clients. "Maybe you shouldn't try so hard," she said hesitantly. "Whatever you say. You're the hostess." At breakfast, I sat in silence, occasionally rubbing my lower back and kneading my fingers. The children cast anxious glances at me, sensing the unnaturalness of what was happening. "Grandpa, are you tired?" Emma asked. "A little, but nothing. I'll get used to it. At my age, any job is harder." Kyle frowned. "Why is Grandpa cleaning the house? That's not his job." "It is his job now," Crystal said, but her voice sounded unsure. "Why?" "Because he wants to help the family more." "But he is. Helped me with my math yesterday, fixed my bike last week." Brad coughed. "Kids, this is grown-up stuff. Eat your breakfast." After everyone had gone about their business, I went over the family finances. I didn't peek at the paperwork, just scrutinized details I hadn't noticed before. The refrigerator was stocked with expensive groceries, steaks, red fish, imported cheeses, organic vegetables. The wine cabinet held bottles at $50 to $100 apiece. In the kitchen, a $1,000 coffee machine that Crystal used once a week. In the garage were two cars, Crystal's $40,000 SUV and Brad's $30 sedan. Both are relatively new, 3 years old at most. There was expensive equipment everywhere in the house. A huge TV, game consoles for the kids, tablets, laptops. The family clearly didn't save money. They lived large, not denying themselves in pleasures. And yet they considered my modest pension a drain on the family budget. Frank Collins called around noon. "Russell, I've been thinking about your situation. I got a great deal on a one-bedroom apartment in the old neighborhood. $450 a month, all inclusive. Describe it to me." "First floor of a two-story building. Separate entrance, small kitchen, bathroom. There is furniture, a bed, a table, a closet. The previous tenant moved out a month ago. I just finished the repair." "Is the neighborhood okay?" "Quiet, working class, mostly retirees and young families. It's a 5-minute walk to the grocery store. Bus stops close by." "Sounds about right. Can I see it this week?" Sure, you didn't tell me why you wanted the apartment. Did something happen to the family?" I've been quiet for a while, trying to find the words. "I want more independence, Frank. At my age, it's important to feel independent." "I understand. I went through it myself when I lived with my daughter after my wife died. I lasted a week, then I got my own place. It's better to be alone than to feel like a burden." "That's right. So here's the deal. Meet me at the house tomorrow afternoon at 2:03. Will you write down the address?" I wrote it down and put it in my wallet. After talking to Frank, my mood had lightened considerably. The plan was beginning to take shape. The next call was to Jerry McLean, my former partner. After retiring, he'd opened up a small plumbing shop and did some private work. "Russell, it's been a long time. How you doing?" "I'm good, Jerry. I live with my son in Muskogee. Listen, I got a question. Remember when you said there's always a job for an experienced plumber?" "Of course I remember. Why? You miss the tools." "I'm thinking about a little part-time work. Not full-time, of course. A couple jobs a week, tops. No problem. I have more clients than I can handle on my own, especially minor repairs. Leaky faucets, clogs, gasket replacements. Just right for a man of your experience. How much money can you make?" "Yeah, depends on how you work. If a couple of days a week, then dollars 300 to 400 a month is easy. More if you're not lazy." We agreed to meet on Monday to discuss the details of our cooperation. Jerry promised to prepare a list of regular clients who needed regular services. By evening, I finished cleaning the first floor and started the laundry. I loaded the machine with laundry, added powder, and started the cycle. Then I sat in a chair in the living room with a newspaper, pretending to be tired. Crystal got home from work around 6. When she saw me in the chair, she nodded satisfied. "What's up? Did you get your cleaning done?" "Yeah, vacuumed, mopped the floors, did the laundry. I'll do the bathrooms and bedrooms tomorrow." "Good for you. See, it's nice when everyone does their part." She went into the kitchen to make dinner. I could hear her humming a little song. Her mood had clearly improved. At last justice had been served, and the sponger father-in-law was in his place. At dinner, the children talked about their schoolwork. Kyle got an A on his math test. Emma had a fight with her friend over some boy. The usual teenage problems. "How did Grandpa like his new job?" Emma asked. "It's fine," I answered. "I'm getting used to it." "Will they pay you a salary?" Crystal choked on her juice. "Emma, what kind of stupid questions are these?" "Why are they stupid? If Grandpa works, he should get paid. He gets room and board." "But that's not money." "Emma, stop it," Brad said sternly. "This is none of your business." The girl stopped talking, but I could see the misunderstanding in her eyes. Children instinctively felt the unfairness of what was happening, even if they couldn't articulate their doubts. After dinner, I helped clear the table and loaded the dishwasher. Crystal watched my actions with visible satisfaction. "Russell, can you do the garden tomorrow? Pick up leaves, clean the flower beds?" Sure, it's part of my job description." "That's great. Also, if it's not too much trouble, could you wash the cars? They're really dirty." "No problem." Each new task she added with increasing confidence. Apparently, she was getting the hang of running a household. "Can you take down the garage on the weekends? There's a lot of junk in there." "Oh, sure. And I could clean out the basement, too." Crystal, Brad interjected, maybe you shouldn't just blame it all on Dad. Why not? He said he'd do it. Besides, it's not that much work. A couple days and it'll be done. I nodded, showing my full willingness to cooperate. Deep down, I enjoyed how easily Crystal fell into the trap of her own greed. The more she demanded, the easier it was for me to justify my future departure. Going up to my room, I pulled out a notebook and made a to-do list for tomorrow. Meeting Frank at 2 in the afternoon, calling the realtor about renegotiating the bank account, buying cardboard boxes to pack. Departure planning had to be meticulous, not rushed. Too many details needed attention. But the main decision had been made. In 2 or 3 weeks, I would be living in my own apartment, working at will, and spending my money on whatever I saw fit. And Crystal and Brad would get exactly what they dreamed of: complete independence from my presence. True, along with this independence, they will lose $800 of monthly income and a free domestic worker. But justice, as we know, requires sacrifice. The next day began with a car wash. I went out to the yard at 7:30 in the morning with a bucket, hose, and sponges. Crystal's SUV was really dirty. Dried splashes from puddles, dust on the windows, leaves stuck to the windshield. Brad's sedan looked a little better, but it needed attention too. I worked leisurely, meticulously scrubbing every detail. Neighbors coming out of their houses for their morning chores looked curiously at the 73-year-old man washing other people's cars at 7 in the morning. Mrs. Patterson from a neighboring property even stopped at the fence. "Good morning, Mr. Whitman. Early start." "Good morning, Dorothy. Just thought I'd tidy up the cars." "I'm glad you have such a caring father-in-law," she said to Crystal as she left the house. "Not everyone is so lucky," Crystal gave a strained smile. "Yes, we are lucky. My late husband loved tinkering with cars too. Said it was relaxing." I nodded, continuing to rub the chrome parts of the sedan. Crystal hurriedly got into her SUV and left for work, avoiding further questioning from her neighbor. By 9 in the morning, both cars were shining like new. I put the tools away and headed into the house for breakfast. Brad was still there, poring over papers at the kitchen table, frowning and calculating on his calculator. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Oh, hi, Dad." He looked up from his papers. "Did you wash the cars yet?" "Yeah, they were pretty dirty." "Thanks." He's staring at the paperwork again. "Damn, the numbers don't add up." "Something wrong?" Brad paused, apparently deciding whether to share the problem. "It's just a work thing. The contractors are overestimating on the new project. I'm having to recalculate." "What's the project?" "It's a high-rise on 6th Street. Remember I told you about it? 12 stories, 120 apartments. Big client, good money. But all the contractors suddenly raised their prices." I sat down opposite my son and looked at him carefully. Over the years in the construction industry, I'd learned to read the signs of serious problems. Brad didn't just look concerned, he looked worried. "How much did they raise it?" 20, 30%. All at once, like they're all in cahoots. And they're pushing back the deadlines. They say they have a lot of orders and ours isn't a priority. That's strange. Usually contractors fight over big jobs. "I don't get it." Brad put the calculator aside and rubbed his temples. A month ago, everything was normal. Preliminary agreements, adequate prices. Now it's like we're being boycotted. Interesting information. I took a sip of coffee, thinking over what I'd heard. And who exactly are the problems with? Pretty much everyone. The electricians at Spark Systems suddenly said they couldn't take on the project. The plumbers at Pipe Masters have doubled their prices. The finishers also nod and vaguely promise to think about it. Some of these names were familiar to me. Pipe Masters, for example, was a company where several of my former coworkers worked. You could talk to them, find out the real reasons for what was going on. Maybe they really have a lot of work to do. "I don't know, Dad. Something's not right." Brad gathered his papers into a folder. "I gotta go. I'm late for a meeting. I gotta figure out a way out of this." After he left, I started cleaning the bathrooms. I worked slowly and carefully, stopping occasionally to stretch my back. Mrs. Harris, the housemaid who came twice a week to help Crystal with the heavy cleaning, had stopped visiting after we talked about new family responsibilities. Now, all the work had to be done by me. At 1:30, Jerry McLean called. "Russell, I got news for you. Talked to Tommy Ryan at Pipe Masters today. He told me an interesting story. What's that? You remember construction management? That's where your son works? I do. Well, there's a rumor going around the market that there's a problem with their license. They could have their license revoked for irregularities in past projects. Serious violations? Tommy doesn't know exactly, but all the contractors are being cautious. They're afraid to get involved with a company that might lose its license in the middle of a project. That explained a lot of things. The construction industry's like a village. Everybody knows everybody. One rumor is enough to damage a company's reputation for months. And who spreads the rumors? Tommy wouldn't say. Maybe it's a competitor, or maybe there's a paperwork problem. I see, thanks for the info. After talking to Jerry, it got me thinking. Brad hadn't mentioned any problems with the license. Maybe he didn't even know about the rumors circulating. Or knew, but didn't want to tell at home so as not to worry the family. At 2 in the afternoon, I met Frank at the Oak Street apartment building. The apartment was exactly as he described. Small but cozy. Clean rooms, working appliances, decent furniture. Old refrigerator, but serviceable. 4-burner gas stove. Everything you need for the comfortable life of a lonely pensioner. What do you think? Frank asked, watching me look around the kitchen. It's okay. I like it. How much for the first month? $450 plus a deposit of 1 month's rent. Utilities included. When can I move in? Tomorrow. I can have the paperwork done in half an hour. We shook hands and Frank handed me the keys. The apartment was mine. The first step toward independence was taken. That evening after dinner, I volunteered to do the dishes. Crystal gladly agreed. She could finally relax after work instead of fiddling with plates and pots. Russell, you're such a help, she said, settling into a chair with a glass of wine. I wish we'd thought of this division of labor sooner. Better late than never, I agreed, rinsing the pan. Can you do the garage tomorrow? There's really a lot of junk in there. We could throw half of it out? Sure, I'll do it in the morning. Brad wasn't talking, flipping through the news on his tablet, but I could see that he was listening to our conversation and looking more and more glum. The problems at work weren't going away. Honey, you don't seem very cheerful today, Crystal said. Tired, tough day. What about that project, the high-rise? Brad looked up from his clipboard. It's still a mess. Contractors are slow to sign contracts. They're citing heavy workloads. Maybe we should offer them more money. For what? We've got an approved budget, no extra money. Crystal frowned. Financial problems always bothered her more than anything else. What happens if the project falls through? I don't know. I hope it doesn't come to that. But his voice sounded uncertain. Apparently the situation was worse than he recognized. Later, when everyone had gone to their rooms, I called another old acquaintance, Ralph Stevenson. He worked as a building license inspector for the city government and knew the ins and outs of the permitting system. Ralph, I have a delicate question. Can you look up the information on construction management? It's not classified. I can check it out. Just give me a minute. He put the phone away. I could hear the clicking of computer keys and muffled voices in the office. Russell, are you there? He came back to the phone. It's an interesting situation. A complaint has been filed against the company for violating building standards on a project last year. A serious complaint? Serious enough to warrant an inspection. If the violations are confirmed, they can suspend the license for 6 months to a year. And who filed the complaint? That's confidential information. I can only say that the complainant knows the building codes well and pointed out specific violations. I see. And when will the inspection be over? In a month or two. But while it's going on, many contractors prefer not to contact the company. It's safer that way. After talking to Ralph, the picture became clearer. Brad's company was indeed under threat. Someone had filed a complaint, knowing that it would paralyze their operations for months. This sort of thing happened regularly in the construction business. Competitors set each other up using bureaucratic mechanisms. One anonymous denunciation in a successful company would lose customers for months. It would be interesting to know who exactly decided to hurt Brad's firm, and why now, when they had a major lucrative project. But that's the details. The main thing was that the family finances were in jeopardy. Brad's salary as project manager was directly tied to the successful completion of the construction. If the project fell through, he could be left without a significant portion of his income. That meant the loss of my $800 monthly payment would be even more painful than they had bargained for. Justice sometimes comes without help. The week passed in a measured rhythm of housework. I cleaned the house, did the laundry, washed cars, and tended the garden with the pedantry of a seasoned servant. Crystal enjoyed the new routine, finding new tasks for me to do each day. I was cleaning windows, dismantling the basement, moving old furniture into the attic. Brad, meanwhile, was looking more and more anxious. Every night he came home from work gloomier than the night before, staring at his phone or tablet, solving some urgent problem. He spoke little at dinner, answering his wife and children's questions with one-word answers. On Thursday, the situation reached a critical point. Brad returned home earlier than usual, around 5 p.m., and immediately locked himself in his office. Through the closed door, I could hear phone conversations in which he was coaxing, pleading, almost begging. I was just finishing mopping the floors in the hallway and unwittingly witnessed one of these conversations. "Bob, listen to me. We've been working together for 5 years. When you were in trouble with that school in Ridge, who helped you out? Me, right?" Brad's voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "What do you mean you can't take the risk?" "What risk? It's a standard project, nothing complicated." A pause. Apparently Bob was explaining his position. "Rumors? What rumors?" Brad's voice became sharper. "Who told you that? We have a clean reputation. No irregularities." Cell phone rings. "Hello? Bob?" Shit. The sound of the receiver being thrown on the table. Then silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. I finished mopping the floors and put the bucket of rags in the pantry. Crystal cooked dinner, glancing occasionally toward her husband's office. She could sense the tension, but she didn't dare ask direct questions just yet. Brad still hadn't come out for dinner. Crystal knocked on the study door. "Honey, dinner's ready." "I'll eat later," came from inside. "I've got more calls to make." "But you're hungry." "Crystal, please, not now." The three of us ate dinner. Me, Crystal, and the kids. Emma and Kyle sensed something was wrong and were quieter than usual. Crystal tried to make casual conversation, but it was strained. "Is Daddy having trouble at work?" Kyle asked. "A little trouble," Crystal replied. "It's nothing serious. It'll work itself out." "What kind of problems?" "Adult stuff. You don't have to worry about that." But I could see the worry in her eyes. She was well aware that something serious was going on, even though Brad wouldn't tell her the details. After dinner, I washed the dishes and went to my room. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Jerry McLean's number. "Jerry, it's Russell. How's my part-time job going?" "It's great. I've already got some clients for you. You can start Monday." "That's great. I also have a favor to ask. Remember we talked about construction management? Can you get the details on their problems?" Sure. Why do you need that information?" "My son works there. I want to understand the situation." "Okay. I'll talk to the people tomorrow, see what's going on. I'll call you tonight." The next day, the atmosphere in the house became even more tense. Brad left for work earlier than usual, around 7 in the morning, without even eating breakfast. Crystal was nervous, rearranging things in the kitchen more than usual, rewashing the already clean plates twice. "Russell, can you do the lawn today?" she asked, watching me eat breakfast. "The grass is a little high, and the neighbors will start complaining." "Oh, sure, I'll do it right after breakfast." "Oh, and if you get a chance, take down the boxes in the basement. There's some winter stuff down there that needs going through." I nodded. During the week, my list of duties had grown considerably. I was now responsible for all the house cleaning, laundry, car washing, gardening, minor repairs, and a dozen other things. Crystal was getting the taste of managing free labor. I mowed the lawn leisurely, enjoying the morning chill. Neighbors out on their errands said hello and cast curious glances. Some stopped for a little conversation. "How are you, Russell?" Mr. Connor asked from next door. "A lot of work?" "Just getting by," I said, turning off the mower. "At my age, it's important to take your time." "That's right. I have a mother-in-law too, 78 years old. But she does nothing but watch TV. And you're good, active." "I try to be useful to my family." "That's right. Family's the most important thing." Mr. Connor left, and I continued mowing the lawn, thinking about what he'd said. Family really is the most important thing, but everyone's idea of what it means to be a family is different. For some, it's mutual support and care. For others, it's an opportunity to exploit the weak. By lunchtime, all the work in the yard was finished. The lawn was mowed, the leaves picked up, the flower beds weeded. I went to the basement to sort through boxes of winter things. It was dusty and thankless work, but I methodically went through old jackets, sweaters, hats. At 4:30, Jerry called, "Russell, I heard about your son. It's a lousy situation. Talk to me." Some competitor filed a complaint against construction management with the city, accused them of violating building codes when they built the mall a year ago. They say they used substandard materials and violated foundation technology. Is that true? Hell if I know. Maybe not. But the complaint was filed by someone knowledgeable, pointed out specific violations of specific points of the building code. The administration is forced to conduct an inspection. And while the inspection is going on, all the contractors are running away from them like lepers. No one wants to get involved with a company that could lose its license in the middle of a project. I see. How long will the inspection take? A month or two at least. Maybe more if they find irregularities and start digging deeper. Who could have filed a complaint? There's a lot of possibilities. Premium Construction, Hartford Builders, Metro Development, they all have motives. The big projects don't show up in Muskogee very often. Everyone is fighting for every job. After talking to Jerry, I worked in the basement for another hour, thinking about what I had heard. The situation was really serious. If the inspection dragged on or found real violations, Brad's company could lose not only its current project, but its reputation for years to come. That meant his salary would be significantly reduced. He might even have to look for a new job. At 42, with a tarnished reputation, that wouldn't be easy. That evening, Brad returned home even more gloomy than the night before. He ate very little at dinner, only moving the food around on his plate with his fork. He answered questions briefly, avoiding details. "How are things going at work?" Crystal asked. "Fine," Brad mumbled. "What about that project? We're still working on it." "What do you mean, still deciding? Are you going to start building or not?" Brad put down his fork and looked at his wife. "Crystal, we're having a little trouble with the contractors. Nothing critical, but we're going to have to wait a little while." "What kind of problems?" "Technical. None of your business." The harshness of his tone surprised everyone. Brad rarely raised his voice at his family. Crystal took offense and kept quiet. After dinner, I cleared the table and loaded the dishwasher. Brad sat in the living room with a beer, mindlessly changing channels on the TV. Crystal retired to her bedroom, slamming the door defiantly. "Rough day?" I asked my son. "You could say that," he replied, not looking away from the screen. "Do you want to talk?" Brad was silent for a moment, then turned off the TV. "Dad, do you remember what it was like in the 90s in construction, when everyone was at each other's throats for every order?" "I remember. A lot of honest companies went bankrupt then. It's the same now. Only the methods have become more sophisticated. It used to be just dumping or bribing customers. Now they use the bureaucratic machine." "Meaning?" "Anonymous complaints about competitors. They point out imaginary or real violations. The administration starts inspections. While the inspection is underway, the company is effectively paralyzed." I nodded sympathetically. "And your company was the subject of such a complaint?" "They did." Brad took a sip of beer. "Someone very knowledgeable about building codes cited specific violations we'd allegedly committed in the construction of the mall a year ago." "Were there violations?" "Honestly, I don't know. There may have been some minor deviations from the design. It's normal in construction. The main thing is that durability and safety are not compromised. But now every little thing can become a cause for complaint." "And the contractors?" "Sure, right. Contractors are afraid to get involved. You see, if our license is revoked in the middle of the project, they'll be left without money. So everyone politely declines or charges exorbitant prices." "So what are you going to do?" Brad twirled an empty beer can in his hands. "I don't know, Dad. Honestly, I don't know. If the project falls through, then—" He didn't finish, but I understood. "Salary's going to suffer?" "Well, the paycheck's half the battle. What's worse is getting fired. And to find a new job at my age, and even with a tarnished reputation—" He got up and headed for the stairs. Well, I won't burden you with family problems. Good night. Good night, son. Left alone, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about what I'd heard. The situation was turning out even better than I'd anticipated. The family's financial situation was becoming precarious at the very moment they were losing my $800 monthly payment. Justice has its own logic. Sometimes it comes on its own, unaided. The next day, Saturday, I met Frank at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Officially, I had gone to the grocery store to do some shopping, which was part of my new responsibilities around the house. What's up, Russell? Frank asked, pouring himself some coffee from a thermos. Did you like the apartment? Very much. When can I move in? Tomorrow. The papers are ready. You have the keys. That's great. Are there any furniture stores around here? There's a few things I need to pick up. There's two good used furniture stores on Main Street, inexpensive and good quality. We discussed the practical details of the move. Frank offered to help move things. He had a small truck for household needs. What about the family? He asked. How will they feel about you moving? They'll find out when the time comes, I answered. I don't want to worry them prematurely. I understand. Family matters are delicate. Exactly. By the way, Frank, do you know any contractors? Sure, why? Oh, I'm interested in the situation with construction management. I hear they're having problems. Frank frowned. Yeah, I heard. Somebody filed a complaint against them. Now they're all shunned. Why, you do business with them. My son works there. Oh, I see. It's a really bad situation. Do you know who filed the complaint? No, do you? There's talk of metro development. They have a motive because they also claim that high-rise project. But that's just a rumor. Sure, metro development? I questioned. And who's in charge there? Rick Davidson. You know him? The name sounded familiar. Rick Davidson. Yeah, sure. 15 years ago, he and I worked on the same project. He was just a foreman then, but he was ambitious and unscrupulous. Apparently, over time, he'd grown into his own company. I know, I said. We worked together once. Then you know what he's capable of. Davidson doesn't shy away from dirty methods when it comes to eliminating the competition. Yeah, I remember him, always willing to undercut a coworker for his own gain. We finished our coffee and left. Now I had one more piece of information. If Rick Davidson was really behind the complaint against Brad's company, then the situation became even more interesting. Davidson was a master of intrigue and dirty games. He didn't just file complaints. He knew how to follow through, using his connections in the administration and his knowledge of his competitors' weaknesses. But he had one thing in common. Rick loved to brag about his accomplishments. He couldn't resist telling how cleverly he'd pulled off another combination. This character trait had gotten him into trouble in the past. It would be interesting to meet Rick and have a friendly chat about old times, and at the same time find out the details of his current projects. When I returned home with my shopping, I found Crystal in a great mood. She was on the phone with a friend, talking about how the homework issue had been resolved. Yes, Sharon, I have time for myself now. Can you imagine I come home from work and the house is cleaned, the laundry's done, the cars are washed. It's like a nice hotel. I went to the kitchen to put away the food, trying not to pay attention to her conversation. But I could hear some of the phrases. No, he doesn't mind. He finally realized that justice is paramount. He used to think we owed him something. Of course, the children were surprised at first, but now they're used to it. They see that Grandpa is doing good for the family. And we save a lot of money. I used to pay the cleaning company $200 a month. Now everything is free and of high quality. $200 a month for cleaning, plus my $800, that's $1,000 a month in savings. Not bad for the family budget. Too bad the savings will only be temporary. Very temporary. Monday started with a surprise. Around 8 a.m., a tow truck pulled up to the house and took Brad's sedan. I was just watering the flower beds in front of the house and unwittingly witnessed the scene. Brad ran out of the house, still buttoning his shirt, and tried to explain something to the tow truck driver, waving his arms and showing some documents. The conversation was short. The driver shook his head, pointed to the papers in his hands, and continued loading the car onto the platform. Brad stood nearby with a helpless look, watching his sedan disappear around the corner. Crystal popped out onto the porch in her bathrobe. What had happened? Why did they take the car? Credit default, Brad answered grimly. 2 months past due. What do you mean 2 months? We've been paying regularly. We were, as long as the company paid my salary regularly. But the last 2 months, they've been 3 or 4 weeks late. Crystal went pale. And you didn't tell me anything? I didn't want to worry you. I thought the situation would be resolved quickly. Sibrani Waninat, what are we going to do now? How are you going to get to work? I don't know. I guess I'll take the bus. Or your car, if that's okay. They stood in the yard for a while, discussing transportation problems. I continued to water the flowers, pretending not to listen to their conversation. But every word was lodged in my memory. The family's financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. By evening, the mood in the house was depressed. Everyone was silent at dinner, the children sensing the tension and hesitating to ask questions. Crystal occasionally threw accusatory glances at her husband, but did not speak out openly. Daddy, why did they take the car away from us? Kyle couldn't take it anymore. It's a temporary problem, Brad replied. It'll be fixed soon. When will it be returned? When we pay off the debt. How much is owed? Kyle, enough questions, Crystal said sharply. Eat your dinner. The boy shut up resentfully. Emma glanced at her parents and focused on her plate. The atmosphere of the family dinner was ruined. After the meal, I cleared the table as usual and loaded the dishwasher. Crystal and Brad stayed in the kitchen and talked quieter, thinking I couldn't hear, but it was worth it just to listen. You should have told me about the paycheck problems, Crystal hissed. I have a right to know about our finances. All right, what would have changed? Brad replied tiredly. All you would have done would have been unnecessary stress. I could have taken action, cut back on expenses, get an extra job. What extra work? You're already working full-time. There's all kinds of things you could do. You could work part-time on the weekends or evenings. Oh, come on, it's just a temporary situation. As soon as the audit is over, things will go back to normal. And what if it doesn't? What if they find violations and revoke the license? Brad's been quiet. Then we'll look for a solution. What kind of solution? It's impossible to find a good job at our age. We'll find something. It's not the first time in our lives we've had to start over. I finished cleaning the kitchen and went up to my room, leaving them to continue their gloomy conversation. It was getting dark outside the window, and the apple tree in the yard looked especially sad in the streetlight. The leaves continued to fall, covering the ground with a yellow carpet. The next day, the problems continued. In the morning, a notice came from the electric company telling her to pay the arrears immediately or the power would be cut off in 3 days. Crystal found the letter in the mailbox and brought it into the house looking confused. Brad, look at this, she said, holding the envelope out to her husband. He read the letter and sighed heavily. How much do we owe? Crystal asked. $450 for 2 months. Do we have that kind of money? Let me see. Brad pulled out his phone and logged into the banking app. His face got even darker. There's $230 in the account. That's it? That's it. The last paycheck went to groceries and gas. Crystal sat back in her chair and cried, quietly but desperately. It was the first time I'd ever seen her in a state of real despair. What are we going to do? She sobbed. How are we going to live without light? I don't know, Brad answered honestly. Maybe we could borrow money from our parents. What parents? Your parents are your father who lives here. Mine died 5 years ago. Friends then? What friends? Sharon's up to her eyeballs in credit cards. The rest of them can barely make ends meet. They sat huddled together, two unhappy people suddenly confronted with reality. Until a month ago, their main problem had been their desire to save money on my upkeep. Now they couldn't pay for basic utilities. I continued to go about my business, cleaning the house and keeping things in order, but kept a close eye on the situation as it developed. On Wednesday, another nasty letter arrived from the mortgage loan servicing company, a notice of delinquency and a demand that the debt be paid immediately. By Thursday, the tension had reached a fever pitch. The children sensed something serious was going on in the house and were quieter than usual. Emma even offered to moonlight as a babysitter for a neighbor to help the family. Kyle wondered if he should drop his math class to save money. Crystal and Brad turned down the kids' offers, but I could see how touched they were. The teens were willing to sacrifice their interests for the family. Friday night, the inevitable conversation happened. Brad and Crystal sat in the living room, going over bills and trying to figure out a way to make ends meet. I was reading the paper in my chair, but I listened to their discussion with the edge of my ear. Maybe we should sell my car, Crystal suggested. You drive it to work now anyway. What are you going to use to get to work? I'll take the bus, or I could get my co-workers to give me a ride. Crystal, don't be stupid. You can't survive in this neighborhood without a car. Then what do you suggest? Brad paused, looking at his calculator. Why don't we ask somebody for a loan? Who? I don't know. He looked in my direction. Dad, do you have any savings? I looked up from the paper. Savings? What kind of savings? Well, maybe I've put something away over the years. A small amount. Brad, I live on a 1,912 pension. I give it all to you. What's there to save? But before, when I was working, I used to pay for my mom's health care and her funeral. You know how much chemo cost. That was true, but not all of it. The money from the sale of the house did go mostly to medical expenses, but some of it was saved. $23,000 in a bank account and $2,500 in cash in a stash. The family never knew the money existed. I see, Brad said, disappointed. Maybe you could get a job somewhere. Crystal suggested tentatively. You know, private jobs, plumbing work. At my age, with a bad back? Well, maybe something light. Counseling, I shook my head. Crystal, who needs counseling from a 73-year-old retiree? They're all young professionals with college degrees these days. But experience means something, doesn't it? Experience doesn't mean much if you don't have the strength to apply it. I put the paper down. I'm sorry I can't help you. I wish there was some way I could... Come on, Dad, Brad said sadly. We understand. It's not your fault we're in trouble. But I could see the disappointment and even anger in Crystal's eyes. She was counting on my financial help, and she was hurting from the rejection. In her mind, I had to share the last crumbs for the sake of the family. Over the weekend, the atmosphere in the house became quite dreary. The money for the electricity had not been found, and it was due to be cut off on Monday. Crystal was nervous, snapping at the kids over nothing. Brad sat with a grim face, going over his options to solve the problem. Saturday afternoon, Crystal couldn't take it anymore and approached me directly. I was just finishing cleaning the windows in the living room. Russell, I need to talk to you. I'm listening. You do realize the situation we're in, right? I do. It's a tough situation. We really need help. Any kind of help. I do what I can. Cleaning the house, taking care of the garden, doing the laundry. That's good, but we need help with money. I put a bucket of water on the floor. Crystal, I've already explained. I don't have any money. I give all my pension to you. But there's got to be some savings. Just a little. No. No, you don't, and you don't. Maybe you could ask someone you know. For a loan? Ask who? The people I know are retired, living on the same pennies. Then try to get a job. Something. Crystal, I said patiently, I'm 73 years old. I got a bad back. I got blood pressure problems. Who's going to hire me? McDonald's would hire retired people. Or Walmart, counselors. I looked at her hard. Crystal was serious about offering me a job at a fast food place or a supermarket to improve their financial situation. After I was already giving them my entire pension and working as a free maid. I understand your desperation, I finally said, but I can't physically work full-time on my feet. At my age, it's unrealistic. How about part-time or weekends? And who will clean the house, do the laundry, take care of the garden? I thought you said those were my responsibilities. Crystal was confused. She hadn't thought about the fact that she couldn't require me to do housework and earn money on the side at the same time. Well, you can do both. How? I don't know, she exploded. But we have to do something. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. That's your problem, Crystal. I'm doing my part to the best of my ability. Your contribution? She grinned wickedly. Hey, you live here for free, eat our food, use our facilities. And in return for what? Vacuum once a day and do the dishes? I give you my entire pension. Pennies. Ridiculous money that's not even enough for the utilities. We were facing each other in the living room, and the tension between us was almost palpable. Crystal was breathing heavily, eyes glittering with unspoken rage. I remained calm, but inside I felt satisfaction. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law was finally falling off. You know what, she said finally, maybe you should think about other living arrangements. There are special homes for retired people. You'd be better off there. Retirement homes? Doesn't have to be a nursing home. There are just hostels for elderly people living alone. Government subsidized, cheap. So you're suggesting I move out? I'm suggesting we think about what's best for everyone. For us and for you. That's when Brad entered the house. He had heard the last few sentences of the conversation and knew immediately what it was about. Crystal, what are you saying? I'm telling the truth. We can't support your father anymore. We don't have enough money for basic necessities. He's my father. So what? That doesn't mean we have to go broke because of him. Maim, we're not going broke because of Dad. We're going broke because of work problems. What's the difference? The result is the same. We have no money, and he just adds to the expenses. Brad looked at me guiltily. Dad, that's not what Crystal meant. She's just worried. I understand, I replied calmly. Crystal's right. In a difficult situation, everyone should think of themselves first. Don't say that. We're family. Of course we are. But families have boundaries. And when times get tough, those boundaries become visible. I grabbed a bucket of water and headed out of the living room. Where are you going to look for a place to live? Crystal asked. I'll find something. I stopped in the doorway. Don't worry about me. At my age, one gets used to solving problems on one's own. Going up to my room, I sat down in a chair by the window and took a long look at the fall garden. Leaves continued to fall from the apple tree. The wind carried them all over the yard. Soon the tree would be completely bare, preparing for winter hibernation. Just as I was preparing for a new life, a life of my own without the pretense of gratitude for a roof over my head and a seat at the table. Tomorrow I'll call Frank and make arrangements to move. It's time for this play to end. Monday morning, I woke up earlier than usual and carefully prepared for the day ahead. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Brad in there with some paperwork and a calculator. He looked exhausted. Good morning, I said, pouring coffee. Morning, Dad. I've been trying to figure out a way out of this all night, but the numbers don't add up. You got something in mind? Yesterday at work, they announced that the project is finally frozen. Half the staff is being furloughed, including me. The power went out around noon. Crystal called the power company begging for an extension, but they politely explained that they'd already granted extensions twice. The house went dark. After a candlelit dinner, the kids went upstairs and it was just the three of us in the kitchen. We need to have a serious talk about the future, I began. Marbury, Crystal had suggested yesterday that I think about other living arrangements. I did, and I found a place to live. I'm moving in tomorrow. The silence was deafening. What do you mean you found a place? Crystal asked. With what money? I borrowed it from an old friend. Wait, she said. What about your pension? The pension will be used for rent and my own expenses. But we were counting on that money. And who's going to clean the house? Sorry, that's not my responsibility anymore. Crystal turned pale, quickly calculating her losses. Dad, do you realize what's going on? Brad said. I don't have a job, we're in debt, and now your help is disappearing. Everyone has to take care of themselves. We're a family. A family is when everyone helps each other, not when one of us works as a free servant and in return gets told he's a burden. Crystal jumped up from her chair. I never said you were a burden. Crystal, that's exactly what you said to your friends on the phone. And on Saturday, you directly suggested that I move into a nursing home. Russell, maybe we weren't very tactful, but we're going through a difficult time. She tried to justify herself. You are, and you've decided to put your difficulties on me. Where did you get an apartment? She asked, changing tactics. On Oak Street, $450 a month with all the comforts of home. So you have $750 to live on? Is that enough? I don't need much. And there are part-time jobs, private plumbing work, 2 or 3 days a week. That's an extra $300 or $400. You can make $300 or $400? Then why haven't you worked before? Because I was busy, cleaning your house, doing your laundry. There was no time for part-time work. Crystal cried. What are we going to do? Without your pension and your help, we can't survive. You'll manage somehow, get a part-time job, cut back on expenses. Russell, please, we know we were wrong. What's going to change? You're going to stop counting my expenses? We'll fix it, as long as it's profitable for you. And when things get better, things will go back to the way they were. Frank arrived with the truck this morning. I was waiting on the porch with the suitcases. The family was standing around with reproachful faces. Grandpa, when are you coming back? Kyle asked. I won't be back, grandson, but you can come visit me. I hugged my grandchildren, shook Brad's hand, and nodded to Crystal. Good luck to you. I hope you get through all the problems. We pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the family standing in the front yard of a house with no electricity, one car, debt, and no source of additional income. They had gotten exactly what they had asked for, complete independence from my presence. But along with that independence, they also received full responsibility for the consequences of their decisions.